I want to tell you something that took me longer than it should have to understand. Retirement can become another job if you're not careful. Not because you need the money, not always. Sometimes social security is not the issue. Sometimes savings are not the issue. Sometimes Medicare, the budget, the mortgage, the pension you did or didn't have, and the adult children who still manage to create small emergencies are not the issue. Sometimes the issue is simpler. You don't know who you are when you're not producing something. That was me. There's a version of this story where I look disciplined, organized, impressive maybe. I had a full calendar. I had commitments. I had lists. I had lunch dates, board calls, charity meetings, a reading plan, a walking schedule, and a drawer full of notebooks that all promised to make me a better version of someone I wasn't sure I wanted to be anymore. That version makes me look good. That's not the one I'm telling. The truth is, I was using productivity the way some people use noise, to avoid silence. I retired from work, and almost immediately I began building another kind of work around myself. A quieter one, a prettier one with better shoes and fewer invoices. But it was still work. It still let me measure my worth by what I finished. And Richard noticed before I did. He usually does, which is both useful and deeply irritating. One morning he looked at my calendar and said, very gently, "Diane, are you retired or are you managing yourself?" I laughed. Then I didn't, because I knew exactly what he meant. The fear was not laziness. I was not afraid of becoming lazy. I was afraid of becoming unnecessary. That's different. I had spent decades being capable. I was good at the work, very good at it. I built businesses, sold one, helped other women build what I had already built, sat in rooms where I had to earn my chair twice before anyone noticed I was already sitting in it. Then one day the calendar cleared. And a cleared calendar, when you've built your identity around competence, can feel almost rude. You wake up and there is no meeting to prepare for. No one needs a decision by 10. No assistant has texted. No client is waiting. No one is depending on your answer. And that feels strange. Not good weird, just weird. It feels like standing in a beautiful house and realizing you don't quite know what room you're supposed to be in. So I filled the rooms. Quickly. Too quickly. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't believe in most 5-step systems. I've tried them. I'm just going to tell you what happened and what Richard and I figured out, or what we're still figuring out. Progress is not the same as completion, and I try not to confuse the two anymore. The notebook was cream-coloured. I remember that because I bought it at a small stationery shop in Boca. It cost $38, which is too much for paper and somehow not enough to stop me from buying it. The cover had a linen texture. Very tasteful, very convincing. I sat at the kitchen counter with a black pen and wrote the words "Retired Life" across the top of the first page. I wish I were making that up. I divided the page into categories: health, family, home, learning, community, personal projects. I used straight lines. I made boxes. I assigned days. Monday was for exercise, calls, and reading. Tuesday was for house projects. Wednesday was for lunch with someone interesting. Thursday was for volunteer commitments. Friday was for family. Saturday was flexible, which meant I had failed to admit I would fill it by Wednesday. Richard walked in while I was making a colour key for retirement. He stood behind me for a moment and said nothing. Then he said, "Are we running a small country?" I said, "I'm trying to be intentional." He said, "It looks like you're trying to supervise yourself." I was annoyed because he was funny. That's a very unfair combination in a husband. I told him structure was healthy. He said, I didn't say it wasn't. I told him I didn't want to drift. He said, I didn't say that either. Then he pointed at the page and said, where is the part where you just have a day? I looked down. There wasn't one. Not one. Every hour had a job. Even the soft things had become assignments. A walk wasn't a walk. It was cardiovascular maintenance. A lunch wasn't a lunch. It was relationship investment. Reading a novel had become intellectual enrichment. That was the moment I saw it. I had removed the office, but I had kept the manager. So I want to go through 5 things I noticed about the productivity trap in retirement. Not as advice, not as a sermon, just as observations from someone who thought she was handling retirement beautifully while quietly turning it into another performance. The first thing I noticed is that being busy can look a lot like being well. That is the danger. People praise busy. They ask what you've been doing, and if you have an answer, everyone relaxes. You say you're volunteering, you're taking a class, you're helping your daughter, you're organising the house, you're walking every morning, you're on a committee. They smile. Wonderful, they say. Good for you. And maybe it is wonderful. Sometimes it is. But I learned that I could sound healthy while feeling completely unmoored. For the first few months after I stopped working, I made sure I had a good answer for everyone. What are you doing with yourself now, Diane? I had answers ready, too ready. I was advising 2 women informally. I joined a museum committee. I said yes to a local luncheon group. I reorganized the pantry, which Richard considered alarming because he has always believed the cereal should stay where God placed it. I took a Pilates class I did not enjoy. I bought the socks. That was how far it went. There is nothing more revealing than buying the socks for a life you don't actually want. I kept thinking motion meant adjustment. It didn't. It just meant motion. Here's what I actually think. I was afraid someone would look at my life and think I had become smaller. So I made the days look full. And because they looked full, I didn't have to ask whether they felt meaningful. That's when I started to understand the trap. A productive retirement can still be an avoidant retirement. That sentence annoyed me when I first thought it. It still annoys me a little. The second thing I noticed is that I had turned rest into a task. This is embarrassing to admit. I scheduled quiet time. Not in a loose way, in a block, on a calendar, with a reminder. Tuesday, 3 to 3:45, quiet reading. Who does that? Apparently I do, or I did. There was one afternoon when I sat in the sitting room with a book I had been meaning to read. It was a serious book, the kind of book that says something about you when it's visible on the table. I opened it. I read the same paragraph 4 times. Then I checked the time. Then I made tea. Then I came back and wrote down that I had read for 30 minutes. I had documented rest. I had not rested. Richard came in and asked if I liked the book. I said, I think so. He said, that's not usually a good sign. He was right. I wasn't reading because I wanted the book. I was reading because I had decided that a thoughtful retired woman reads serious books in the afternoon. There's a version of womanhood I still chase sometimes. Composed, literate, well-rested, effortlessly elegant. My mother had that quality without trying. I have spent a great deal of money trying and not quite achieving it. My mother never scheduled quiet time. She just became quiet when the house allowed it. I don't fully understand how she did that. I don't think I inherited that part. What I did inherit was the belief that a day should have shape. That part is useful, but I had made the shape too tight. Even rest had to justify itself. That was not rest. That was productivity wearing softer fabric. The third thing I noticed is that retirement exposed how addicted I was to completion. I like finishing things. I always have. A clean inbox, a signed agreement, a settled invoice, a room arranged properly, a decision made. Completion gives a person the illusion of control. I am very fond of that illusion. When I was working, completion made sense. Things had deadlines, people expected answers, money was involved. If I didn't finish something, someone else felt it. In retirement, I started creating finish lines where none were needed. I decided to clean out the hall closet. Reasonable. Then I created categories: donate, repair, store, ask Sophie, ask Jonathan, possibly archive. One closet became a governance structure. I found a box of old photographs. Some were from Sophie's school years, some from Jonathan's graduation, some from a trip Richard and I took when we were still young enough to think a delayed flight was a serious problem. I should have sat down and looked at them. Instead, I sorted them. By decade, then by child, then by whether I appeared in the photograph wearing something I would prefer not to remember. There were several of those. Richard walked by and said, "You know, you're allowed to just look at them." I said, "I am looking." He said, "No, you're processing." That word stayed with me. Processing. I had turned memory into administration, and that is not a small thing, because retirement gives you back certain pieces of your life: old photographs, quiet mornings, long conversations, the chance to sit with something without needing to convert it into a result. I didn't know how to do that. I knew how to extract usefulness. I knew how to organize. I knew how to make the drawer better than I found it, but I had forgotten how to simply be with something. That was more uncomfortable than I expected. The fourth thing I noticed is that productivity can become a way to avoid being seen by the people closest to you. Richard and I were both busy for most of our marriage, not unhappy, busy. There is a difference, although sometimes one can hide inside the other. We raised children, we built, we travelled, we made decisions, we handled aging parents, we hosted holidays, we got through the years the way many people get through them, by doing the next necessary thing. Then retirement came, and suddenly there we were, in the same house, at the same time, with fewer excuses. Richard adjusted faster than I did. He retired 3 years before me. He found a rhythm in about 6 weeks. I watched that from across the room with great irritation. He could read the paper, take a walk, call a friend, fix something unnecessary in the garage, and appear entirely content. I found this suspicious. I would ask, "What are you doing today?" He would say, "Not much," and he meant it as a complete sentence. I found that almost aggressive. After I retired, I filled my calendar partly because I did not know how to be that available, not to the world, to him. There was one evening when we had dinner at home, just the two of us, salmon, a salad, and a bottle of wine we had been saving for no particular reason, which is usually the best reason. I was mentally reviewing the next day while he was talking. I could hear myself making small sounds of agreement, the kind women learn to make while doing 3 other things. He stopped and said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm here." He said, "No, you're organizing tomorrow." I was, and I felt caught, not accused, caught. The truth was, productivity protected me from a kind of intimacy I had not practiced in years. If I had enough to do, I didn't have to sit across from my husband and ask what we were now. Not as parents, not as workers, not as the people who built the life, just as two people still here. That's a more vulnerable question than it sounds. The fifth thing I noticed is that not every useful day looks impressive. This may be the hardest one for me. I like a day that explains itself. I like being able to say, I handled this, I finished that, I made the call, I took care of the appointment, I improved the thing. But some of the best retirement days don't explain themselves well. One Thursday I had planned to do 3 things: return a call, review paperwork for a non-profit board, go through a folder of old tax documents that no one, including my accountant, had asked me to go through. Sophie called around 10. She sounded tired, not in crisis, just tired in the way women sound when they are carrying too many invisible things at once. She said, "Are you busy?" My first instinct was to look at the calendar. That tells you everything. I looked at it, then I closed it. I said, "No." She came over with Claire. Noah was at school. Claire had a small pink backpack and a very firm opinion about crackers. We sat in the kitchen. Sophie talked for almost 2 hours about work, about Adam, about being pulled in different directions, about feeling like she should be grateful and still wanting to scream in the laundry room. I understood more of that than she probably realized. I said less than I wanted to. That was growth, by the way. Not offering advice to your adult daughter should qualify for some kind of medal. Maybe a small one, tasteful, no ribbon. Claire drew a picture of Richard with very large ears. He said it was accurate. When they left, I had finished nothing on my list. Nothing. The paperwork was still there. The call had not been returned. The tax folder remained as thrilling as ever, and yet the day felt whole. Not productive, whole. That distinction matters. I had been asking the wrong question in the morning. I kept asking, what should I get done? Some days the better question was, what am I available for? Availability is hard to measure. That's probably why I avoided it. There is no neat check mark for listening to your daughter. There is no metric for noticing your granddaughter has started drawing hands differently. There is no column for sitting with your husband after dinner and not reaching for the calendar. But those things count. Quietly, they count. I still like structure. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I have not become a floating person who follows the breeze. I don't trust that version of myself. She would lose the car keys by noon. I still make lists. I still keep a calendar. I still believe a well-run day is a beautiful thing. But I no longer want every day to prove I deserve to be here. That was the trap. Not productivity itself, the proving. I had to stop turning retirement into evidence. Evidence that I was still sharp, still useful, still disciplined, still impressive, still the woman who could handle the room. Because eventually, if you're lucky, no one is asking you to handle the room. And then you have to ask whether you can simply live in it. I'm not there perfectly. Some mornings I still overfill the day before I've finished my coffee. Some afternoons I still feel a small panic when I realize nothing measurable has happened. But I'm learning to recognize that feeling without obeying it immediately. That's progress, not completion. Progress. If something in here landed for you, leave a comment. Tell me what you started doing after retirement that looked healthy from the outside, but may have been hiding something else. Maybe it was overscheduling. Maybe it was volunteering too much. Maybe it was organizing the house within an inch of its life. Maybe it was exercise. Maybe it was helping adult children so often that you never had to sit with your own quiet. I'm curious about the thing you filled your days with, not because I want to judge it, because I think many of us are doing this more than we admit. And if you're not retired yet, tell me what you're afraid would happen if your calendar went quiet. That question is more revealing than it looks. I read the comments. I find them useful, more useful than I expected to. Richard reads a few too, and then says something inconveniently accurate about them 3 days later. That's all for now. Take care of yourself.